In this video, we're going to continue with our present value function example, except instead of creating the present value function as a user-defined function, we're going to create it as a program or a sub. So this is going to be not something that we type into a cell itself, like we did with the user-defined functions. Instead, we're going to call this either by going to our developer macros menu. Nothing's there yet. We haven't created anything yet. Or we're going to access it by making a button. And I'm going to show you how to make a button in just a little while. But to start, what we're going to do is make the very simple program that we started the last video with. So let's just take an interest rate, discount $1 back 1 year. So jumping over to VBA. Now instead of starting, notice I already have option explicit in here. We're still maintaining that. Now I'm going to type sub. And let's call this my first PV. And instead of function, we'll call it a program. So we hit enter, and we have that in sub statement pop up. Notice that it can have arguments, right, in between the parentheses. We're not going to use those quite yet. They'll come in further down the road. So now what we want to do is we don't have any inputs for the user, so we have to define any variables that we're going to use in our program. So one of the first ones we know is interest rate. So we're going to dim interest rate as a double. We also need a variable to hold our answer. So let's do dim PV answer as double as well. All right, so we initiate the variables that we're going to need. Now, PV answer we're going to calculate. Interest rate, well, we need that to come from the user. So interest rate, we'd like to be equal to something that the user gives us, but we need a way to tell them what to give us. That way is going to be an input box. So the input box is going to cue the user in on what it is that we want. In this case, we're going to, essentially we have to give first the user a message. Notice on your screen that you see the different requirements that go into this function. So there's lots of different things that can go in here. We're not going to use them all. But the first thing is the prompt. This is basically what you tell the user. So we could say, please enter the interest rate. Being careful to type things well. All right, so that's what it's going to tell the user. The next argument is the title. This is going to be the title of the box that pops up. So let's call this our PV calculator. And we'll see each of these in just a minute when we go back over to the code. And then finally, the last one we're going to use for today is the default. So a default is really important because sometimes with input boxes, users are just going to click through them. They'll just hit OK as soon as something pops up, and they don't really pay attention to what it is. You still need to have a value in for our interest rate. So the default is what they put in by default. So in this case, let's put in 0.1 as our default. So an interest rate of 10% is going to be our default parameter. All right, now that we have our input box, we can actually go test to see if our program is starting to work. So let's flip back over and let's run our first program. However, how do we run it? Well, again, one way is to go into macros. So from macros, we see our list of programs and we can click run. There's our input box that just popped up. All right, notice that the very top of it says PV calculator. That was that title that we typed in. It then says, please enter the interest rate. That was the prompt. And then finally, the 0.1 that's already in the box, that's the default. So if we say OK, now that's input that value into interest rate in our VBA code. So our input box popped up, but we didn't do anything with that yet. So now we need to take that interest rate and use it to calculate our present value. So here we can type present value answer. We're going to assign that variable that we created above. And we're going to take 1 divided by 1 plus interest rate raised to the 1. Again, we're hard coding in that we have a $1 cash flow and in 1 period, just to keep things simple for right now. All right, so we have our PV answer. And now that we've calculated that, though, we need a way for the user to know the answer. So where we had an input box to take in information from the user, we can use message box to put information out to the user. So in this case, our prompt for the message box is just going to be PV answer. So we're going to return that to the user. So just to summarize what we've done in this code is we initiated our variables. We retrieved the interest rate from the user. We calculated present value. And we output answer to the user. All right, let's go see if this works over in our Excel. So what I'm going to do is show you, instead of going to the macro menu like we did before, let's actually add a button. So if we go up here to Insert, notice we're in the Developer tab. This first button is a form control of a button. So I'm going to drag this here. And when you do that, it's going to pop up this box that says Assign Macro. So I want to assign it the first PV program. We're going to change the text so it's clear what's in here. So first PV program. And now whenever I click this, it's going to run that program for me. It asks me what is the interest rate. It still want 10%. That'll be fine. And here the answer pops up of 0.909090 repeating. Not very pretty. We'll clean that up later on. But it's at least giving the answer back to the user. Now, is that the right answer? Well, we can check up here. Let's actually, as long as we turn our periodic cash flow to 0 and we have the same inputs, yes, it's the same thing we got. So we're doing the calculation right. We're getting the information a little bit differently than the function, right? The function, we just typed it in the Excel cell in that function. Here we have to get it from an input box, and we give the answer back via a message box. All right, let's add a little bit more complexity with our second program.